Hi everyone, welcome to the Art of Form Building. This is really an introductory course that's designed to help instruct you and help you become comfortable with the iFormBuilder platform. So the slides that I've developed today have links attached to them, or there are a lot of links in them, so that you can just go through the PDF that's shared with you, and you can click on those links and it'll open up customer success articles that we've developed to help you get started using that functionality within iFormBuilder. Before we start, we do have an awesome get-together that we're having occur on May 13th. This is in Reston, Virginia. This is our Power User Summit. So if you're someone who's interested in seeing some of these workflows that our power users have created and learning more from them, or if you yourself are a power user, I strongly suggest you come to our Power User Summit. The event is free, and it's just, especially if you're in the area, it's a great way to learn more about the iFormBuilder and the different successes that other groups have had. The other thing that we have with the Power User Summit is the day before we have two excellent training sessions. One is on integration. So if you're working on trying to build more integration within your workflow and having data flow from iFormBuilder into other accounts, then you'll want to attend that session. If you're brand new to FormBuilder, we have FormBuilder 101 course that I'll be instructing, and in that session we're going to go through the ins and outs of form building and go into some of the smarter form building that we have within iFormBuilder as well. All right, so today's training topics, we're going to focus on the best practices with form building. We're going to address the form building golden rules. I'm going to give you a demo of a form. We're going to just go through just the basics of building that form and building that functionality. But we'll also go through each step with building the form. But at the end, we'll have a little quick Q&A session. So if any questions were unanswered during the time, or if you want to save your questions for the end, you can. I do want to make this an interactive experience. And so if you have questions and it's easier to say them, then feel free to raise your hand within the GoToWebinar, and Ella Hay will give you presenting rights, and then you'll be able to address the whole audience instead of just typing up your questions. So keep that in mind too. To start, here at iFormBuilder, we never leave you hanging. We never leave you by yourself. And so there's a couple steps that we want you to take to help you become more successful within the platform. One of them is to sign up for our Customer Success Center. So if you go to, like I mentioned, these are links. So I'm going to open up this page, and this will bring me to our Customer Success Center page. Once I've launched this page, it gives me the options to sign in. Currently, let's pretend I'm like some of you and I don't have a current account within iFormBuilder, the iFormBuilder Help Center. So I'll click the Sign In button. And at the very bottom, it says New to iFormBuilder Help Desk, sign up. So make sure you go and do that as soon as you finish this session or anything else. It's just very, very important to do that to help with your success with the platform. The other thing we have implemented is we have this little box that's at the bottom of every form building page, and it gives you the option to chat with one of our agents. So we usually have Joe, Penny, or sometimes even Tony, who go and man our help desk. Let me take a step back. They go and they're a part of this chat. So if you have a question, whether it be a longer question or a shorter question, go into that chat box and fill in your information and feel free to ask our agent. And if they can answer that question quickly and give you the link to a helpful article, then they will. Otherwise, they'll say, sorry, I might have to get back to you at a later date. And they'll probably get back to you within a couple hours or so once they have the information. Next, with building your success, you're going to make sure that you follow our release notes. These releases come out probably once or twice every month. We have a new release, whether it's a release that affects the iForm app or it's a release that affects a server update. These releases are either new additions to the platform or they're bug fixes. So you're going to want to make sure that you go into the releases within the Customer Success Center and follow that article so that every time we have a new release, you'll receive an email letting you know what that release is and when that release will occur. The next section we have here within our Customer Success Center is we've created this little community. Now this community is for forums, and this allows you to post questions to other people who are using the platform, but also we have a specific forum called the Vote for Features section. The Vote for Features section is where you, our users, get to put in your own idea and what you'd like to see added to the platform. This is where we get all of the updates for the platform. We get them from our users. So you want to make sure you post them in that forum or go through that list and upvote some other people's posts so that the higher up the list it gets, the more apt it is to get into our platform sooner. So make sure you do that as well. The next and second to last one that we have here is our iFormBuilder implementation support. So we have a large amount of services that we offer to our customers just to make sure that you're successful, whether it be training or whether you'd like us to build out your forms or help you build some type of integration between your internal system and iFormBuilder. We have these services set up so that we can assist you with that process and get the ball rolling faster. And the last thing that we have is our iFormBuilder Academy. And in our iFormBuilder Academy, we have a list of our training sessions. There's a list that includes all of the recorded sessions, and this recorded session will also be in that list, but it also includes some helpful training materials for your end users. All right, enough about that. Let's get into form building. So the first thing we're going to go through with our form building is our best practices. And these have been developed just through what our experiences is with form building, as well as what we've seen go wrong with form building in the past. So that's where this list kind of comes from. The first thing that you want to do here when you're starting to build your forms and building your form library is you want to use a naming convention. Not only does this help you organize your form building list, but it also helps you identify and helps other form builders in your group identify what forms are connected. So for this example, I just said my parent form, that table name is going to be parent form name underscore P. Then every additional, if I add a subform that's connected to that parent form, I'll start that name with parent form underscore, and then I'll use the subform name and then underscore child. So as you can see in this little picture on the right-hand side, a lot of these are starting with that same parent naming convention, and then it goes into what child form it is. So this is the naming convention that I use, and I find it very helpful. You might find one that's just as helpful, but I wanted to show you what I had. The way that you create this naming convention is through the Edit Form Properties page, and once we start building out your form, you'll be able to see where that page is within the process. But the way that it's done is just by unchecking the box that says based on label for your table name, and that's where you're going to be able to change how it's viewed within your form builder library. The next best practice is to always test on all the different devices that your end users are going to have before that form is live. So if your users are going to be using an iPad or a tablet as well as maybe an iPod Touch, you'll want to make sure that you've tested it on both the iOS and Android system, but also on the smallest device types. The reason it's important to look at the smallest device type is one of our option lists that you can add to your form is called a select option list, and this is where you see the buttons on your form. Now, if you've added too much text or if you've added too many select options, then it may be hard to read on those smaller devices, even if it looked fine on the larger iPad or tablet. So that's why you're going to want to make sure you test on the smallest one. The next best practice that we have here is to add subforms. What you're able to do with subforms is you're able to split up the information that you're getting from the user. So essentially what a subform is, it's just another form that is attached to your parent form. So when I say child form, subforms, and parent form, so that top layer, that first form that you create is that parent form. Any form that you're attaching to that parent form is called a subform, or also you may hear me say it as a child form. So each of those subforms are their own individual forms that you're able to add to that parent form. Going back to why it's important to do this is you are able to allow your users to take one-to-many records within a subform. So if you wanted them to, like this last example, I suggest to use a photo subform. The reason we suggest doing that is because you're allowing your user to take as many pictures as they need within that subform. So if they want to take one, they can do that, and then they can create a new record for a second picture. Or if they want to take hundreds in that subform, they have that option. By adding that subform and allowing them to have a multi-link subform, then you don't have to add all of these images or all of these photo widgets to your form to allow for them to take multiple pictures. You just have to add it once, and then if they keep creating records within the subform, then they can take as many as they need. The next thing you want to keep in mind while you're building out your forms is the layout of the form. So with iFormBuilder, we allow you to add all of these different input types, and we have over 40 different input types. But you may not want to add hundreds of questions to that parent form, especially if you start adding logic. The reason for that is because what will end up happening is it'll take longer and longer for the users to download those forms to their devices, as well as for them to upload them to the cloud after they've completed a record. So what we suggest is try to limit it to no more than adding 100 questions or 100 input types to that top layer of the form, to that parent form. Now, what you may find is when using subforms, you may have 200, 300, 400 questions, but because they're broken up into subforms, it's actually a faster sync rate than if all of those questions were on that parent level form. The next best practice that we have here is to help your users recognize the forms on their device. You can do this when we're building out a form. There's a section called description. In that, you're able to place in a description of the form, and when the user sees it on their device, they're able to read more about that form before they even launch it. So that's how they're able to identify if they're opening the correct form at that time. The other thing that you get to do within the form builder is you're able to add a custom color around each label here in the home menu. So in this example, you see that I have a little red box around this one and maybe the black box around here. So what I've done is I've added the reference IDs to allow me to add those custom colors. So then the user is able to identify quickly what form they want to open as well. So moving forward, some other best practices for your form building is to always make sure that you have a device handy while you're building forms. This allows you to test the form you've built rather quickly. You didn't have a device next to you, you may have to wait a little while, and it may not be helpful to have to wait to see if something's working and something's not working. So I suggest having one or multiple devices handy so you can see if you're using an Android and an iOS phone, you're able to see how it looks. Another best practice is when you're in the iForm app and you go into the under the gear icon into the settings, you'll see something called Clean Local Database. So if something in your form and maybe some images aren't looking quite right, I would suggest cleaning the local database within the iForm app to have the whole iForm app be wiped out, and then it'll resync and all those form assignments will be re-downloaded to your device, and then go back into that form to see if that structure is fixed and if it's looking right. If it's not, then if you're using any smart controls or something like that, then that may be the problem. And if that's not it, then just come to our chat and ask one of our chat agents why that could be, and we can help you with that. Another best practice here is to open multiple browser tabs for convenience. So even when you see my examples later on, you'll notice that I have about 5 different tabs open here. This is because I may want to have my parent form and then all my subforms that are attached to that parent form opened so that I can quickly look at the information that I have. And one thing to note here is every time that you build a form, when you're the form builder, that form's automatically going to be assigned to your device. That being said, that means that when you have subforms, you may only be assigning your parent form to your users, but all the subforms will be viewable on your devices as well. The last one here is to make sure that you follow the iFormBuilder golden rules. And those golden rules, if you're not aware of them yet, are listed here. So this first one is to always test your form before you're going live. So before you assign your form to all your users, make sure you've tested it at least a couple times to make sure it's functioning correctly. The next form building golden rule is to make sure that you use a unique data column name that's database friendly. So if you can see in these little screenshots at the bottom, I received this error message that says data column name location is not allowed. The reason for that is a word that's in our reserved word list, and that's location is actually a name of one of our elements, and that's why it's not going to be database friendly. So if you end up receiving one of those error messages, what you'll have to do is you'll have to refresh your form builder window, add that element again, and then when you've added it, because you may want to have the label as location, but you can uncheck this little box that says based on label and change that data column name so that it is database friendly. So for this scenario, I just changed it to user underscore location, and once I saved that, then the error message went away and my form was fine. The third form building golden rule is to make sure that you do not change the input type, data size, or encryption of an element on a live form. If you do that, it will delete your data. And that's super important, especially when you guys are building out your forms. You want to make it so that you can make changes to your form even once it's gone live, but you want to make sure you don't delete the data when you do make those changes. So what we've developed for that is if you need to change the input type, the data size, or the encryption of an element, what you'll have to do is in the form builder, under the input type, you would select the element that you need to change, and you would check off the disabled button, duplicate that element, and then change the input type, data size, or encryption of that element so that you don't affect the data that was collected before, but you can make the change you needed. Now again, that's just if you're trying to change the input type or the data size or the encryption. All the other things that you change won't affect the data that was collected. And next we have the thoughts before you start building a form. The first one is just what devices will the end users be using? This of course is pretty important if they're using depending on if they're using an iOS or an Android device. The next one here is you want to make sure that you've developed and decided upon the naming convention that you're going to use. Not only would you use that for the table names, but you could also use that for the option list. So that even when you go into your option list manager, you can see that that option list was first developed to go along with a specific form. The next thought that you may have is how should you structure that form? So a lot of times when you get started with Form Builder, you're kind of given this whole big stack of papers or the whole long form, and it's just told to you, okay, take this paper form and put it into Form Builder. Now, you don't want to keep it as one layer as you do with the paper form. So here with iFormBuilder, this is where you're going to add those subforms and break up those sections into different subforms. The next thought is, what element input type should you use for each question? So we want to make sure that you're gathering the correct kind of data. And part of that is just understanding what element input types that we have to make sure that you're applying those to your form so that you're getting the answers that you want. And lastly here is where can you add form functionality or smart controls to cut down on human error? Now today's session, we're not really going into smart controls, but our next session in a month from now, we do go into that. And I think if you could all attend that as well, that would be extremely helpful. But our smart controls use basic JavaScript to allow you to show or hide elements based off of a user selection previously, or even more, you can default items, you can do almost anything that's a JavaScript statement. You can do that with the smart controls, and you can cut down on that human error to allow for a better data collection process for your users. All right, so before we go into building a form, Ella, hey, are there any questions that have come through?
We did receive one, and I'm sure it's a popular question. The question is, does iFormBuilder also work on laptops?
That is a wonderful question. So iFormBuilder was designed to be a mobile data collection platform. So the way, what you can imagine with that is the users can only collect data using an Android or iOS device. Now, as far as collecting data within a computer and a laptop system, there are integrations that you can build to have data flow from another web service that would collect data using a laptop and push that to iFormBuilder, so all the data could be collected and consumed in one location. All right, thank you, Ella. That was a great question. Okay. So now that we're going to get started with building our form. So I touched upon earlier that it is important to add a description to your forms and the reference IDs, and that's done in our Edit Form Properties page. So let's go ahead and go into the Form Builder. And if you're going to follow along and do this process on your own screen, that's great. So the first thing that I've done is I've gone into Form and Form Builder. Once I'm in my Form Builder account, this is where I'll see my library of forms, and this is where I have that naming convention. So you can see that going through. I can identify the forms that go together. It's also in this page that if I wanted to take a form that I previously created, I could copy that form. I could just open that form, but today we're going to focus on creating a new form. So now we're on our Edit Forms property page. And here on, let me just move this over a little bit. Okay, so this is our Edit Form Properties page. That top part, which is our form label, this is what the user is going to see on their device. So for this one, I'm just going to call this Basic Form. Now I want to make sure I'm following my naming convention, so this is where the table name, underneath where it says the table name, I'm going to uncheck that box that says based on label, and I'm going to add my table or my naming convention here. And that's just taking that parent form name and then at the very end doing _P. Now this is the description that I mentioned to you earlier that you're going to want to use to add and to help your users identify what this form's about. So today I'll just write basic form used in training webinar. So hopefully if I saw that, I would know exactly what that was, but maybe I actually even want to add the date. So I'll say on April 29th, 2015. Beneath that, we have our form icons. Now, if you didn't like any of the icons that we've supplied here, you can just go and do a Google search or Bing search and try to find another icon that you like. And once you found that, you can place that URL underneath. But today, I'm just going to use one of the default icons that we have, and I'm just going to I'll take the paint bucket for this one. Now below that we have our reference IDs, and these we're not going to touch upon today, but in the PDF that I'm sharing with you, I do have the links to if you do want to add the reference IDs to your forms. But reference ID 3 and reference ID 5 are where your reference ID 5 specifically is actually where you're going to customize that color scheme, so that what I was showing you earlier where I had the red border and the black border around specific forms. If you want to do that, then you'll use reference ID 5, and you can put in the custom colors there. And that you'll be able to find more information through that custom form menu colors link that's going to be shared with you later on today or tomorrow. Underneath that, we have the label icons URL. So if you're planning on adding any images to your forms and you want to add maybe a logo to the very top, then you're going to have to place a URL path in this label icons URL section. Again, I have a link to how to do that in the PDF. And the last section here is just the page level JavaScript. So if you're planning on adding a lot of JavaScript functionality to your forms, or if it's a pretty complex workflow, then you'll place that here in the page level JavaScript. Also, I want you to note that if you're finding that you have too many forms, or if you wanted to delete a form, maybe the form you're building today, later on you decide you want to delete it, that's done on this page as well. So I'm going to save my changes. And now that we're in Form Builder, we have just a very basic structure, very user-friendly. And as you can see, there isn't much to it. But where you want to start is you want to start at the Add New Input. By default, it'll always add a text element. And now, while you have that page open, I'm just going to go through what each one of these are within the element properties page. So the very top section, you'll see common. This is where you have your label and your data column name. Earlier I mentioned to you that you want to make sure that your data column name is database friendly. So if I were to use location here, I'd have to change my data column name, and I can do that by unchecking the box that says based on label, and that way I can make sure that that term is database friendly. Underneath that, I have my input properties. So this is a list of our 40 some odd input types that we have. If you hover over any of these, then you'll be able to identify what each one of them are. This is also where if you needed to change maybe the encryption or change the input type of a field that's on a live form, you would disable that field and then duplicate that input type and then make the changes needed. If you want to make sure a specific field is completed and it's required before submission, then you can check off the required box there. If you want to have them hide the typing, then you can do that as well. If you scroll down a little bit further in this section, you'll see that there's an attachment link. So this is where, if you're using our attachment widget, you can add that there. But you can also change the keyboard type. So by default, for the text, it's just going to be the basic text keyboard. But maybe I am using a text element, but I want the user to put in a number. If that's the case, then I would choose the number pad or number and punctuation instead. And if I chose one of those, that would show up for the user. Next, within our form structure, we have our option list. So if I added one of the 3 option lists that we had, I would go into the option list manager and I'd be able to add the specific options to that option list. Below that is our smart paging. This is if I were to use a subform element, and in just a few minutes, we're actually going to add an option list and a subform. So if you're a little confused by that, just bear with me and you'll see that in action and actually hopefully perform that action as well while we go through that. So under the subforms or smart paging, we have our smart controls. These are 5 different smart controls that you can add that, like I mentioned earlier, you're able to add a more custom workflow as well as use basic JavaScript statements to complete that workflow. Then we have our smart table search. If you're wanting to have form fields auto-populated with specific data, then you can use the smart table search to call to records that are going to be stored locally on the device. And then based off of a unique identifier, those other form fields would be filled in for the user. So that's what you can do with the smart table search. Our reference ID is we have different reference IDs for the reporting side of the form building. So maybe if you had a specific element that you don't want to be shown on one of the reports, then we have custom reference IDs for that. And the last section is just the little info, and that's important for the index value if you start building out larger functionality. So probably already today, you've heard me say widget, you've heard me say input type, you've heard me say input, maybe even element or element input type. Sometimes I combine them all. These are all the same thing, and you'll see that within our documentation. It may call it widget sometimes, and you may see it element the other time. So just keep that in mind when you're building out these forms as well. Now, like I mentioned, we have all these different element input types. And these are a list of each one of them. And if you're trying to look and get more information on these, I've created a link here at the bottom that you can click to learn a little bit more and select which ones you want to learn about. Now I'm going to keep this here on the left-hand side of my screen, and I'm going to bring up my device to show you what some of those element input types look like within a form. Okay, so at this point you should be able to see my device on the right-hand side and then the different input types on the left-hand side. So now I'm just going to open up the iForm app, and I'm going to go into a form that I built earlier. Let me just go back. The form I'm going to open is called Demo Building Inspection. So at the very top of this form, I just have some very basic input types. I've used the text for both the first name and last name, and for the date, I've used the date element. For the email address, I've used the email widget, but I've also, when you use the email widget, you're able to assign a pick list to it. So if I go into my email address, I can just put in the first part, and then this domain list over here, I created that with my option list manager. Underneath that, I have where it says building inspection. That's a subform that I've attached to this form. And I'm going to launch that subform. So that with this subform, keep in mind that I can create as many records as I need to. So I've made this into a multi-link subform. I've used the attachment widget where I've added a URL. And even though I'm disconnected, or even if I was disconnected and I didn't have any Wi-Fi, I could still open this attachment and still see this image. Beneath that is just one of the pick lists. And that goes for all the numbers. And then underneath that, I had the number. So it defaulted to the number keypad. I'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this element where it says tap location button below, this is using our location element. And once I'm in here, I'll want to refresh so I have the most current location. Then I have a text area. So if I have lots of reasons for inspecting, then I want to include a text area for my users. Earlier I mentioned that we have buttons that can be on the form, and that's done through the select option list. Here with this select option list, I've actually added icons and images, and you can do that as well. If I select yes, so I've added some functionality to this, and I've selected yes, I can use my toggle. And then this is another example of the select option list. Then if I go to the photos of the building, within iFormBuilder, you can use our image widget, which just allows the user to take a photo. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll take a picture with camera. That's a really boring side of the table, but there's where I am, so I'll use that photo. Now, if I wanted to allow for annotation on top of the photo, I can do that by using the drawing widget, which I've included, which is listed over here as well. And I can select a photo at the bottom. So I'll take a picture of outside to make it a little bit more exciting. Once I select to use photo, then the user can decide if they want to use it as a background image or a floating image. And there's a lot you can do with the annotation features. And I suggest that you play around with it later to see if that's what you want to allow for your users to do. Next, if I wanted to allow for a photo caption, I could include, they could write a little description if they wanted to. I could give them the option to add an audio recording, so if they wanted to make sure that they talked through it a little bit, or if maybe there's a specific sound that you wanted them to capture, then you could use that element as well. And then I just have another location widget included here. Now I press the done button, and because this is a subform, if I was in again, I can take as many pictures as I want here by just tapping that subform element, and that would bring me back to a blank slate for the user to complete that subform. Then I've added the signature widget, and I'll submit that and press done. Brings me back to that parent form. here I can assign the record to someone. So this is using our Assign To widget. And what the Assign To widget does is it shows all the users within this specific account, and I can assign my record to them. So potentially, if I wanted to, I could say that if I've completed half of it and my supervisor needs to look over it and to do a sign off, I would assign it to my supervisor and then leave this supervisor signature blank. And then once it's been assigned to them, they can review all my subforms, all the data I've captured, and at that point, they can sign off. So I've showed you a good number of the different subform or the different elements that we have. Now that if I keep this page up, are there any questions of about the different input types that we have?
Yep, so we have one about whether or not there's a grid element type.
A grid. I guess I'd want to know a little bit more detail on what grid element type you're looking for. So within each subform record, you're able to create a table, and that kind of, if you've already collected that data, you can view that table in that grid look. Otherwise, each element is on its own line. So Ella, just let me know if they come back with any questions and just interrupt me. I'd be happy to answer.
Yep, will do. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So then we have our different pick lists, our different option lists, and we're going to add this to our own forms. But like I mentioned, there are 3 different types. There's the select pick list, or a select option list, the pick list, and then the multi-select. So the select is the buttons on the page. The pick list launches a little box on top of that, on top of the page to show all the options, and you can only select one with the pick list. And then the multi-select looks just like the pick list, except you're allowed to click off as many selections as you want. And then let's go ahead into our form builder. So we've already added a new input, and for this, for our very top one, let's just call this first name. Now I can have this so that the data column name first name, it is database friendly, so I know I don't need to change anything with that. Underneath that, I want to add a new input. For this new input, let's add the location widget. So I may want the label to be location. Now again, oops, sorry about my spelling, but again, I know that's the term that's not database friendly, so I'll uncheck the based on a label box for the data column name, and I'll change this to either user location, location 1, whatever it is that you want. Now that I've done that, because this defaults as a text area, I want to go down into my input properties. I'm going to select the location widget, and that's it. Now I've added that field to my form. The next thing I want to do is I want to allow for an option list. I want to add an option list to my form. So I'm going to add a new input again. And for this option list, I'm going to call this, let's say, item severity. Now I'll go into my input properties. For this one, I believe I'm going to make it a very basic option list. So maybe it'll be a low, medium, high type of option list. So I'm going to create a select option list because I know those aren't long words, as well as I know that the buttons will fit nicely, because usually around 3 or 4 buttons is the max that I try to add when I'm using the select option list. If there's more than 4 options, then I want to make sure that those terms are rather small so that it fits nicely within the devices. So even though I've selected the option list type, I need to then go into my option list manager and create this option list. That's done by pressing the plus button, and that's under the list of all the option lists. So here's a list of all the option lists that I have within this account, but I'm going to create a new one by pressing the plus button. Then you'll see the pound sign, and it says my option list. So I know that this is the one that I've just created, and I want to go into this one and change the name. So I'll call this one demo item severity. Like I said, I'm going to just have low, medium, and high for those options. Now, before I assign the list to my element, I first need to save the list. Once I've saved it, I have to then locate it within the list of option lists that I have, and there it is, demo item severity. And at that point, I'll assign the list to my element. Now, if you go through your option list manager and at some point you notice that there are a lot of blank option lists and you want to delete those, that's done by pressing the negative button at the bottom. So I've created my option list and now I've assigned the options to my option list, and now I'm done with the option list completely. Next, I want to add a subform. Now, I already did a little bit of work before this so that I already had a form created that I wanted to be my subform. If you hadn't created your subform yet, then what you'd want to do is you'd actually want to open another window or just load the parent form that you had done so far for the parent form. You want to save it and load it and then create the form that's going to be used for the subform. You'd want to create that and then go back into the parent form to assign that form to this parent form. If you don't do that, then when it comes to assigning that subform, then it wouldn't be in that list, and then you'd have to refresh your window and then remake your subform. So I just build the subform separately and then reload my parent form, and that's when I assign the subform. So for this, I'll just call the label. Yep.
Go ahead, finish that part. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine. For the label, I'll just call this one subform element. I know that that data column name's good, so I'm fine with that. I then want to go into the input properties and select subform. Now that I've done that, I need to select the form that's attached, and that's done through smart paging. Here's a list of all the different forms that I've created so far. For this one, I'm just going to choose my photo child. After I've done that, I get to select, do I want the user to only create one record with that subform, or do I want to give them the option to do multiple? For this one, I'm going to go multiple because I want them to take those pictures. And then I'm just going to save that form. Elhe, what was your question?
So going back to the grid question, and I think this might be something that happens after all of the data is collected, but let's say, for example, that there's a table with several work orders with summaries and with summaries of the data. Is there a way for the user to scroll through the list of work orders and then select a specific one to see the detailed information?
So yeah, you're definitely able to do that. You'd want to use the smart table search for that. And the way that you'd set up your form is maybe you would have an option list for the names of the work orders, or maybe if there's a specific number for each work order, that would be the unique identifier. Once the user put in that work order number, then it would call to that record of that work order, and then it would pre-populate all the information that was previously gathered. So again, that's using our smart table search.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so now we have the first name, we've added location, we've added item severity, we've added a subform element, and let's just add we'll add the signature field as well. Now I know that your forms are probably going to be a little bit better than this, but hopefully this just gives you an idea of how easy it is to build out forms. So then I just go into my input properties and select signature, and that's it. So I'll save this form and I will resync the iForm app, because like I mentioned earlier, every time you create a new form, it's automatically assigned to you. Okay, now if you build out your form, you should be able to test yours as well. So I'm just going to go to the iForm, sync by pulling down. Every form that you create, it's always going to go to the very bottom. So here I have the basic form at the very, very bottom. If I press the little info button, that little I, it'll give me that description that I wrote, so the basic form used in training. Then I can launch the form from there. And now I have that first name text area, the location widget. I have the select option list underneath. I have my subform element for my photos, and then the signature. And that's it. I'm done with that form. So it's a piece of cake. Now I'm going to show you another form that I've worked on, and this is actually, it uses some of the, I'm going to go from the demo building inspection that we did earlier, but I've added some smart controls in it, and this is just a way to cut down on your user's input. So I've used some built-in functions, and I've pre-populated the top 4 fields with the user's name, their last name, their date, and their email address. So at this point, I've launched the form, and there's four areas that I don't have to change or add anything to. So that's really helpful, and that's a great way to cut down on that human error. And the way that I did that was just, let me make sure I have that open. In the smart controls for the dynamic value for both of these fields, I just used our built-in function for iFormBuilder.firstName. And the same thing for the last name, and then I've defaulted the date, and then I've defaulted the email address to that user's email address as well. So that's some fun things that are really simple to add to your forms to make them a little bit more dynamic. And there's just one more form that uses our Manatee Works, which is a barcode scanning platform. And it's awesome to be able to add that functionality to your form, because then your user just has to scan the barcode, and that will pre-populate form fields as well. So I'm just going to scroll down. Here's a little example of one of my QR codes. And if I just press the tap to scan button, it launches the camera. And now what it's done is I was able to successfully scan that barcode, and it's parsed out the data. From there, I can take the information from that raw data and then add it to those read-only fields, so the user doesn't have to put in any of that information as well. We found that a lot of companies have been really successful with using the barcode scanning, especially if you're using it for inventory or for user badges. You can get all of that, as well as for license scanning. So here's a record that I created earlier where it put in all my license information. Now, hopefully you guys won't steal that, but it's very easy to use doing that. Now we're getting near to the end of the training webinar, and so I was hoping if you guys have any other additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and thank you for attending. What I've included here on this last page is just some additional links for you to look into adding more to your forms, and as well as the links to our training sessions, implementation support, training courses that we have, and Elahe and myself a link to our email addresses. So thank you again, and feel free to ask any questions or add any comments. I know that it's not always easy to take time out of your day for these sessions, so thank you very, very much.